those who are following on YouTube, I hope you enjoy the song that we put on there, Burn, Fire, Burn, or it's called God is a Fire. It's a song that Judy Vandenberg wrote several years ago when they had Fresh Fruits Company, and it was a really good song. It is a good song because it talks about the fire being a good thing, not a bad thing. The fire is the truthful word of God that burns away everything that's carnal, everything that's hindering us. So that's why I put that song on there, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. So we're continuing our teaching on the spiritual symbology and the code and symbology of the living word Jesus spoke. And so it's really been an interesting study for me. Yesterday I spent 13 hours in my office and just digging these truths out. What I find interesting, and Butch and I talk about it a lot in K2, but it's just really sad how we who call ourselves Christians, and I'm sure other religions too, because I know other religions don't allow their people to read any books but their books, you know, or their Bible or their version of the Bible. I feel that way too if you want to drop it down one. But there's so much more in history. And if you really think about it, you know, before Jesus showed up and, you know, everybody thought that he came to start Christianity, which he didn't. He didn't come to start a religion. He came to free us from religion. But there were many more people who wrote and studied and discerned God and sought God before Jesus showed up in all different races. And so there's all kinds of historical books out there that we can learn from, you know, and there again, just like the Bible, we need to make sure that we have the code, which is the eternal love of God, you know, and if it doesn't fit God's love, then we put that on the shelf. I don't always say just throw the book away, but we put it on the shelf. I threw a book away the other day or yesterday, so I've been meaning to look at it. Somebody told me I would really like it, and I went through several chapters of it, read certain things, and I just thought, this is rubbish, and I threw it away, you know. But just because somebody says something you don't believe doesn't mean that every part of their teaching you won't believe and you won't understand. And so that's why I always say, if it's something you can't handle right now, just put it on the shelf. You know I lose followers sometimes because sometimes I go too far, but I'm telling you, I'm not going to stop. There's no end to what Jesus came to reveal to us. There's no end to who God is and what God did at creation. And there's no end to who we are. We're much more than we've been taught that we are. And that's why, you know, I listened to my friend Sandy. She did a video yesterday talking about her experience going through losing Rod. And it was very emotional. It was done very well. But, you know, and she said the same thing. A lot of people, I don't understand. I don't understand. Well, then that means there's no end, because we can understand. And we will understand. And when you've lost a loved one, that's not the time to really understand. You know, but there comes a time in our life where we say, I understand why this is happening, but it doesn't negate the fact that those things that happen don't hurt us. And where we want to get to is where there's nothing going to hurt us anymore. Nothing's going to destroy our joy and our hope or whatever. So that's one of the reasons I'm teaching this, because I do believe we need to learn how to live spiritually. Yes. And just because Kay first taught that book, living out of that teaching, living out of our spiritual resources, and then I wrote the 2 books on it and taught it for 2.5 years, doesn't mean that we have completely learned how yet. But we are a lot further than we used to be, a whole lot further. So, and this is the 4th chapter that I'm writing for our book. And I'm not sure I'm done with this, but I may be, but I'm not sure. But I titled it, Who Was Jesus is Jesus. Because some people think that Jesus no longer exists, and then some people think that Jesus does exist, and some people think that Jesus is in heaven sitting on a throne and waiting for us to pray for him to get him to get God to do something. I've heard people say that all the time. You know, and the Catholic religion teaches people to pray to Mary to see if she'll talk to Jesus, so Jesus will talk to his Father. And I'm not mocking that, because I've been there before. I didn't pray like that, but I did pray to Jesus quite often, and I asked Jesus to do things for me all the time. And that came from our misconception of what prayer is and who we are and all that. You know, and I know that makes people have a gnashing of teeth when you say that, because all of our life we've always prayed to Jesus. And we, you know, you hear people say, oh Jesus, or Jesus have mercy on me, and all that. And so we need to understand what conversing with God really is, and how to do that. And one of these days I'm going to write and teach a whole series on prayer. how to properly converse with God, from my perception. I'm not saying I'm the authority on all things, but I know a whole lot because I've been told many times I'm full of it. So I know that I know a lot. Valerie Robinson confirmed that fact for me several years ago. So I hope she's listening. She'll laugh. So there is only one way to attain a real depth of wisdom and understanding, and that's to turn away from false beliefs. Until we turn away from false beliefs, we can't go on to a greater understanding. If I'm in elementary school and that's all I want to learn about, and I like Jack and Jill stories, and I like 1 + 1 is 2, and I just want to stay there, I'll never go on to high school. And if I like high school and I like what I've been taught and it satisfies me, then I will never go on to college and I'll never grow. And false beliefs have been taught in religiosity for years. There's a lot of false beliefs that we believe to be true. And like what we say all the time is, what happens is people believe the lie so much that when the truth comes, they believe the truth is the lie. Correct? And so there are some false beliefs that we have that we got to turn away from. But until you get to the end of that, you won't do it. Until you come to the place where you realize, you know, I've been believing this all my life and it's really not bringing me any help. And the reason people won't leave that is because they think nothing else can happen until Jesus comes back or until we die and go to heaven. You know, so we think that that's all there is, but it's not. And that's why I say there's much more than just the Bible. There's much more understanding out there than just the Bible. But the Bible is very important. It's the best, and some of the people that follow us won't agree with me, but really it is the best book that we have if we can break the code. And if we can understand the spiritual truths instead of just the carnal, the surface level reading of the Bible. So all men and women should know, all religions should teach that the one God of the Egyptians, the one God of Moses, the one God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and the God of Jesus is our creator. And we can list every other religion that has a God, but there's only one God. So whatever name they call God, there's only one God. You can call God Jesus. People do that all the time. People say that God was Jesus. Well, in a sense, God was Jesus, just like God is me and God is you. You know, I am God in a body, you know, so we can say that. But everybody should know that. And everyone should know that God is the controller, the ruler of the universe. And many varying names, there are many varying names of our Creator, and many have wrong perceptions of Father, but there is only one God. And I believe this with all my heart. God meets people where they're at. He meets them where they're at. You know, if you have a child and mommy is always mommy, and they always relate to mommy, as a little child would, that mama always provides for me, then guess what? Mommy will relate to that child if you love them where they're at. You know, you can have a child, you can have 3 children. You can have 2 that are very independent. They take care of themselves, you know, and they're all right, and they don't need anything from you but your love and fellowship. But then you can have another one that is very dependent upon you, and they approach you still with a child mind, if you would, like, I need your help. And if you're a loving father or a loving mother, then you meet them where they're at, and you gently try to help them grow, you know. So you don't want to enable them all the time. But our Father does meet people where they're at. Everyone that worships God with a different name. Every religion there is that believes there is a God. They believe, and even people that believe in the universe, and they say the universe or whatever, they believe that God is omnipotent, universal, and divine. All admit that God rules. They admit that God is unchallengeable and supreme. Yet very few are willing to declare they are as God, and they are to do like God, and that they are a son of God. And that's what we've discussed quite a bit in our teachings, that Jesus said, I am a son of God, and the Jews didn't like that. The Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. The Jewish leaders were entrusted with the oracles of God. The Jewish leaders were to teach generation after generation after generation, but they failed in that. They only taught their generations for a couple of generations and they quit the truth. And so they did not believe they were a son of God. And just like many people today, they do not believe we are a son of God. They believe that Jesus was the only son of God. And that's because of the way the Bible was translated to say that he was the only begotten son. And people will argue with that. And as I told you a few weeks ago, I looked up the word begotten, and it means the only one that stayed in his birth state. Now, he was the only one in his world. There could have been others in other parts of the world that had awakened to who they were already. But he was the only one in his world that stayed in his birth state, and he knew who he was, and he learned who he was as he grew. So we are all a son or daughter of God. And to experience this, the truth of this matter, this mortal, which is what, do you remember what the word mortal means, Donna? Liable to die, Ann? Okay. It means liable to die mentality. And so that's where most of us been. We have been living, and I always like to use the word as because it's not who we are, but we have been living very loud with a strong liable to die mentality. Most of us, there's not many weeks that goes by that we don't think about death. Is that not true? We have things that happen to us. We have things that happen to other people. We have birthdays when we're turning 70 and those thoughts like I am this week. And like there's thoughts that come to you. Oh my gosh, you know, if I let myself have an affair with carnality, I think, man, I've only got probably 15 years left. Well, that's not true, right? So it's proof positive, as Alan Merrill here in Oklahoma used to say, it's proof positive that we still have this liable to die mentality, and we must put that down. We must allow a change to take place. When we put that down, then immortality comes to light, and we believe that we know and we understand that we are immortal beings. And I know with all my heart that Father God never created man to die. There is no death in Father whatsoever. If he did, everything he created in the universe would have died, but it did not. And so this mentality, this change is we are transmuted from it into immortal understanding in our awareness. See, that I am already who God created me to be. You are too. I am already immortal. I was watching a lady teach this morning for a little while, and some person talked about waiting for the manifestation to come, something like that. But the truth is, we are already the manifestation. We are everything that God created us to be. When you gave birth to a child and you held that baby in your hand, everything that child could ever be was already in that child. Nothing had to be put in that child, but that it needed to be loved, and it needed to be nurtured, and it needed to be taught, right? Yes. Needed to be taught by spiritually mindful parents, which very few have been, right? So in putting on this incorruption, it's necessary to lay aside, it's not necessary to lay aside the material body. It's not necessary for me to die before I put on incorruption. We've been taught everything's going to be wonderful over there, and we're just going to have to endure what we have here. And that's not true. And so in putting this on, there's this transformation that takes place in the material body, in our conscious awareness. When our conscious awareness becomes fully aware of who we are, then all the hindrances that are making our body get old, all the hindrances that are allowing sickness and disease, all that will go away. Because that is literally the sin, which is a mistaken identity. Just saying I'm old is a mistaken identity. Or looking at somebody and saying he's old. One of my dear friends, Sandy Hibbard, the other day, she did an art show on TV, on Facebook for all of our friends, and she had lots of beautiful art. She did a live video on it, and we watched her, and she pulled up a piece of art that I had, and she thought I'd already gone to bed, and she said, y'all all know Roy, he's an old fart. And I didn't hear her say he's probably already gone to bed, but I just took great offense to that. I laughed, but I'm not an old fart, you know. We've got to stop allowing those things to come into our, yes, people may say it, but we got to stop allowing those things to come into our awareness. Because once our awareness really wakes up to who we are, we will realize my body is already perfect. My body is already whole. Your body is already whole. We will realize this whole earth is filled with God's glory. which is the word of God sometimes, but it's the very weight of God. And so we are spirits, and we've said this many times, and we'll continue. We are spirits slowed down to visibility. We're not going to become spirits slowed down to visibility. I, you, everyone already is everything that God created me to be. Everything. So Father is divine intelligence, which is universal divine intelligence. Father's intelligence is everywhere in everyone. Full of wisdom. There's nothing that we nothing that we don't need to know that we don't already know in our God mind. And we're just learning how to tap into that. You know, I've had a lot of things happen in the last couple of weeks that I wanted to do and I needed to do, and I wasn't sure how to do it, but it began to come to me. It just all of a sudden, well, this is what you need to do, and this is how you do this, and particularly on a computer program. I wanted to edit my own videos. I wanted to be able to take this video and edit that part off that I have it on and I'm not in front of the screen. I wanted to add an introduction to it, and then I wanted to put a song, and then the last week's video I put back up, I even put a picture of a man and a woman with a door opening to a church, and it says welcome, and then I entered a audio thing that had a audience clapping, and they say Roy, and it says Pastor Roy is just getting ready to teach, or just in time, or something like that. But I knew how to do that, but I wasn't aware that I knew how to do that, right? Okay. So my grandson showed me the program. He said, here's a program you can do that on, but didn't necessarily show me how to do all of it. But as I was doing it, I just literally heard, well, go do this, and you can add another picture, then you can put a song in that picture. And it was like the very Spirit of God, which was the voice of God in me, was just talking to me and taught me how to do every bit of that. I mean, we have that. I remember years ago, me and two of my friends were lost and stranded out in outer space. No, it was like it. We were down in the Kiamishi Mountains down in southeast Oklahoma, and we all had three-wheelers, and it was getting late, and we was trying to get back home before it got dark. We were out looking for a place that they were going to hunt, and all my three-wheeler got hot, and so I stopped it, and then I tried to start it, and I pulled, and I pulled, and I pulled, and the rope came out, and we're out there in the middle of nowhere. You know, well, we found out when we woke up, we were about a block away from our cabin, but we slept in this cold, damp, rocky creek, so we didn't want any critters to eat us. And so they put a rope on mine, and we got it back, and I was trying to fix it. And you know me, Carl, I don't know anything about mechanics. I took it apart, things started falling apart, springs started falling, and I just said, Lord, we're going to be here for 3 or 4 days. I want to have fun. I don't want to have to stay here. You're going to have to show me how to do this. And all of a sudden, I saw, pick this up, put this here. I mean, this was back when I didn't know anything about spiritual understanding, but literally I put it together, pulled the rope, and it started. You know, so we do know all things, right? We just have to tap into our knower, which is our God mind, our real mind. So we are all sons, and we are all daughters of God, and we can experience these things. We can experience this understanding. Because Father is divine intelligence. And Father is in all living things, even animals. You know, I used to not believe that a long time ago. But everything that has breath is God. The whole creation reveals God's glory. And so Father's intelligence brought forth all the material creation. And this God's eternalness, I made up that word, I guess, but our God's eternalness sustains all things. So when God saw in his mind man, and man came into being, then God's eternalness inside of us sustains us. It sustains the sun, and it sustains the stars. It sustains the planets. It sustains everything. And I found it was interesting. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but I was reading in some places, because I always say I don't like to say he, because it gives our Father a gender. You know, we say Father because that's a progenitor of everything. But literally, I looked up the word he when Paul was talking to the people on Mars Hill, and he actually said this God. He didn't say he said this God. Because you have all these gods that you worship, but you've got this statue to an unknown God just in case you're missing one. And so I like to use the word now, this God. So when you hear me say that, you know what I'm doing. So the infinite wisdom of all that is, all that has been, and all that ever will be came from our Father. And it's inside of us. It's Father's collective intelligence. It controls us, if you would, and it's changeless. Then, if that's true, immortal men and women is made into Father's image, and so we are the very image of God. And just because the majority of mankind has died, it doesn't mean God created us to die. Just because the majority has died, it does not mean God created us to die. Just because the majority believes something, it doesn't mean it's the truth. What the majority believes, what the crowd believes, it's never the truth. It never has been the truth whatsoever. So, mankind then has wisdom. Mankind has intelligence. Mankind is empowered, even with a means to access the divine intelligence and wisdom and their God mind. I believe that we can get to the place where we live and move and have our being 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I believe we can get to the place where all of our thoughts, all of our decisions, all of our belief systems, everything comes from our God mind, and that we are free from that carnally mindful teaching, because the truth will do what? It will make you free. It makes you free to live life and life more abundantly. And if you're living life and life more abundantly, then you're living out of divine wisdom, divine understanding, and divine knowledge. Is that not true? It would be. So according to many historical, and I have several of them, and I have several Eastern books that I've gotten recently. I've downloaded some, I've bought some. This is the stage of consciousness that Jesus attained through the training he received as a child up until he was 12 years old. Many people have not heard, some people have, but there are a group of people called the Essenes. You ever heard of them? The 4N?
How do you spell it?
Essenes. And they were there. They were out in the desert. That's where they lived. They left and went out in the desert. And I'll talk about them a little bit more, but they were part of the Jewish sect. You had the Sadducees, you had the Pharisees, and you had the Essenes. I always used to say the Sadducees were very sad because they didn't believe in an afterlife. and that's why they were called, they're sad, you see. You know, they never believed in an afterlife whatsoever. So in many historical writings, there's this evidence that Jesus was taught by the Essenes. And we don't hear that in church. We don't hear that in religiosity. We don't hear that in seminary schools, because they don't study anything but what came out of the version that the Catholic religion wrote, which is either the King James Version and some of the other versions that came out of that. And they don't believe in any other historical studies, and that's crazy.
Yeah.
You know? So this was this stage of consciousness that Jesus attained through that training that he received, and the training that he received from his mother. If you remember when I talked about Mary, and that there was no need for a virgin birth, whether she was a virgin or not, there was not a need for a virgin birth. And I've studied what that really means, and I'm not going to go through that because a lot of it people would struggle with some. But the word virgin really means set apart. You know, if I never grew up in a religious-minded church and I never heard religion, my brain would be a virgin, right? My conscious awareness. I remember Melanie years ago, when she came to know the Lord and had some experiences. She said the Lord told her that he's made her a virgin again, you know. And I don't know what she was thinking about, but what that was talking about is I've made your awareness a virgin again. And many of us need to be made virgins more and more and more in our conscious awareness, and that's what Father's doing for us. But in many historical writings, there's much evidence that only Jesus' mother taught him for those first few years, when he was a baby up until he was old enough to go out and study under the scenes. And I've found places, several places, and I believe in, where Mary received spiritual training from the Essenes. It's called Essenes. Mystical training, which mystical means spiritual. And see, the Essenes believed that, because they were part of that of the Jewish sect, but the Essenes believed that the law had a lot of spiritual understanding to it, and that's what they sought. And that's what we're seeking today, aren't we? We want to know the spiritual truth of the Bible, not the carnal truth of the Bible. So I've read, I don't just go through one source. I've looked at many, many sources that reveal that Mary was taught of the scenes and she had great understanding. I'm jumping ahead of myself here a little bit, but it's also thought that the Essenes are the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember several years when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. I used to have a CD with all that on there, and I don't know, I lost it somewhere, but I used to have that. But however powerful those teachings were, and they were needed by Jesus, they were needed by Mary because Mary was going to give birth to an anointed messenger. You know, and I believe God puts us in places to bring us to the place that we're anointed to be. I believe when I was birthed in my mother's womb, I believe that I had an appointment. I believe I've had a mandate on my life, just like every one of you do. It could be to be a farmer. It could be to be a doctor or whatever. But mine was to be a scribe and a messenger and a teacher. And all through my life, I can look back over my life and I can see that appointments, divine appointments that I've had with certain people brought me to where I'm at today. Donna, if I would have never got hungry to learn, I would have never found John Corson, would I? If I didn't get hungry. We got to that place where we were dissatisfied in what we were learning. John Corson is from Jacksonville, Oregon. He's retired now, but he was a fabulous teacher in the Foursquare Church. I think it was Foursquare, I may be wrong. But if I didn't get dissatisfied, I would have never met that messenger in my life. And then I would have never met Gary Garner, that messenger in my life. And then I would have never met John Cahill. Or what's our brother that passed away in Tulsa, the preacher that was visiting? Scotty Todd. I would have never met Scotty Todd. Right? So I believe there are divine appointments for us that we're not aware of sometimes, but we need to be aware. The scripture says, doesn't it, somewhere, or it's that tradition that says we entertain angels unaware. Well, angels mean messengers. We all have divine appointments, and that's why we need to always be aware and pay attention. You know, like when somebody's looking at you and they're fixed on you, you need to pay attention. Maybe you need to talk to that person. It might not hurt to say, do I know you? No, you don't know me, but I have a word for you. Right? And so we miss out on all that a lot. So Jesus never spoke against the Essenes in the Bible. He spoke against the Sadducees and Pharisees. He spoke against what they were teaching. He told people, you are of your father, the devil, which means the Mosaic law or Moses, the do-to-be laws, if you would. So I believe the reason he didn't is because they were seekers of spirit and truth. The Bible says that God seeks those who ascertain and seek and desire to know him in spirit and in truth. And they did that. Now, some places I wrote that people said other things about him, but I'm not sure that's true. That weren't good. So, with Jesus' supernatural heightened intelligence and awareness, he had that. Why? Because when he was born, his mother did what we wish all of our mothers would have done. He was protected from religiosity. He never heard that he was a sinner. He never heard that he needed to please God. Yes, he was later on, he learned and he was aware of the Jewish belief system, but he was also aware that it was wrong and that it was a false perception. When I went to church, I grew up in a Pentecostal holiness church, which is very legalistic. And I'm not speaking against them, but they are. They're under the law. It's all about outward appearances that makes you holy and righteous. So I was taught that way for 10 years of my life, and that's where I was really enforced with a sin conscience all my life. I would have rather had Mary to teach me, because Mary had a teacher that taught her truth. Right? So it'd be better that you don't teach them anything if you don't know the truth. Find somebody else that knows the truth and teach them. So what happened, he remained supernatural in his awareness. But he was still just a little child, so he didn't know how to handle it yet. See, if you have a talent in birth, you need somebody to teach you how to handle it, to expose you to things. And we know stories of where people were born and all of a sudden at 2.5 years old, they are fabulous piano players and violin players. Why? Because there's a gift in them. But the parents had to bring them a violin, had to get them a piano. But many of them never needed any lessons. They were so super intelligent. I mean, that's what they say about them. They're super intelligent. Well, we are super intelligent. No matter what you think of your wife, Carl, she is super intelligent. We're all super intelligent, but we have to learn to tap into that intelligence. So what happened with Jesus, he very quickly learned, and he surpassed his teachers and his mother's understanding. And he learned to listen to the voice of God. So again, like I said, no matter what they taught him, which was good, what he learned from Father exploded all that knowledge within him, right? I can tell you this, from 1988 to from 1988 to about 2005, I learned a lot from man whose breath is in his nostrils and who sought spiritual knowledge too, but mainly it was a carnal teaching with a little bit of more spiritual truth. So I learned a lot. I transcribed everything John Cahill taught for 6 years. I mean, not John Cahill, John Corson. He taught through the Bible year by year, all the way through, and I typed that over and over and over, and I learned his knowledge. And then I met Brother Garner, and I typed all of his teachings out. With their permission, I transcribed them, and I learned what he knew. Then I took several years and typed John Cahill's. I've typed 120 chapters that he taught out of the book of Genesis. It would be a big old book. I've typed all of Exodus out. The list can go on and on and on. But now that I'm tapping in the Spirit, and now that I'm listening to my God mind, guess what? All that is coming to light. The truth. Now I understand what they were saying spiritually, right? And so that's what happened to Jesus, but he did it very quickly. All the things that the Essenes taught him and that Mary taught him, and then all his knowledge of the Old Testament that came into being when he was probably 8, 9, 10, 11 years old or whatever, all of a sudden he had relied on that. And that's how he was able to confound the doctors of religion. I mean, those dudes like Paul knew it backwards and forward. He was probably one of them when Jesus showed up. I don't know, but I'm guessing he was. And he confounded them like, this kid's 12 years old and he knows more than I know. You know? Why? Because he never left his supernatural state of being. He never left his supernatural awareness. He never left his God mind. He was never exposed to religiosity. His mama never said, baby, when you grow up, you're going to have to get saved. When you grow up, you're going to have to offer sacrifices. You're going to have to give money to the priests and on and on. He never was taught that. Isn't that awesome?
It is awesome.
Because I remember we used to say, won't it be great when a child's born and their mom and daddy knows the truth and they teach it to them? That's what happened with Jesus. And I believe it's probably happened with other people over time. So he never left that state of being. So no one in the world he ministered to remained in that original birth state in his world. I'm not saying there was nobody on planet Earth that had really awakened, but in his world, no one but him had. And then most people, when they're born, they very quickly become human-minded. Would you agree with that? Very quickly. Just look at a baby. I found an author I was looking at yesterday. His last name is Shure, S-H-U-R-E. And I like what he wrote He wrote a lot, but I want to read this to you. He's speaking of Jesus. He said, the truths Jesus heard was expanding in the depths of his nature, like some lovely flower emerging from a dark pool. It resembled a growing light which appeared as though transparent in their essence. He read thoughts. You know he read thoughts, don't you? He knew what they were thinking. He read thoughts and saw souls. Then in memory, he caught glimpses as though through a thin veil of divinely beautiful and shining beings bending over him are assembled in adoration of dazzling light. I believe those were messengers, teachers. For those master teachers drew ever near him and guided him. So that could be the Essenes. Wonderful visions came in his sleep. And to me, that would be listening to the divine mind, to the God mind. Wonderful visions came in his sleep, duplicating themselves in his consciousness. And these transports of rapture which carried him from zone to zone, as though toward the skies, he at times felt himself attracted by a mighty dazzling light, and then plunged into an incandescent sun. This ravishing experiences left behind in him a spring of ineffable tenderness, a source of wonderful strength. How perfect was this reconciliation he felt with all beings. In what sublime harmony was he with the universe. But what was this mysterious light, though even more familiar and living than the other, which sprang forth from the depths of his nature, carrying him away to the most distant tracts of space and yet uniting him by spirit with all souls? Was it not the source of all that is? For all those who follow the path see the same dazzling light and are enveloped in and by it. When I say it, I mean spirit. I added that. And then he said, he named it his Father in heaven. Isn't that cool? So, you've heard me talk about this in times past, but Luke wrote of Jesus, and the child grew and waxed strong in spirit and was in the deserts until the day of his revealing himself to Israel. And that was at 12 years old. So from a very early age, he went out into the desert. Who do you think took him out there? Huh? His mama. I mean, a child 4, 5, 6 years old wouldn't just go out into the desert by himself. I don't believe that. I don't believe father would just say, get up, 4-year-old, and take off to the desert. So his mama took him out to learn. The Essenes lived in the deserts. They wanted to separate themselves from carnality, if you would, and they were going over scriptures, going over historical writings, and they were looking for the spiritual aspects of that, and they were trying to learn to live, and they were living out their spirit to the point that they became master comforter teachers. Okay? And you've heard me talk about that before. Luke further wrote, now this is in Luke 180 and Luke 240. I'm sorry I didn't give that to you. 180 and Luke 240. So in Luke 240, Luke further wrote, and the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom. And the Spirit, which I put, and the holy breath of Father was in him. So the mind of God was in him, right? And I haven't really studied it out, but I know what it means. But the word in means at rest. If I'm in this house, I'm at rest in this house, right? If you're in something, you're part of it. Like Brother Garner used to talk about being in Christ or in Jesus, and I'll never forget him saying it. He said, this is an oak podium here, and if I'm in this podium, I'm oak. That's how he tried to explain that. It's interesting that some of his followers that's come along later want to deny the fact that we're one with God, or we are as God. But the truth is we are as God. And so literally the holy breath was as him. He was at rest in that. So he waxed strong. And the word deserts, now in Luke 4, where it talks about Jesus going up to settle those two questions, am I who God says I am? Am I here to take over, or am I to go to the cross, the judgment of the Jews? When it says he went out into the wilderness there, it meant a place of being alone. A place of being alone. He didn't go to the wilderness because we know he went to the temple and he sat on at the synagogue, and he sat up there and he got away from the crowd so he could settle those two questions. But in this one it says deserts, plural. So he actually went out to the deserts where the Essenes were, and he was taught out there for several years. And Mary allowed him to do that. So as I wrote in an earlier chapter of this book, Mary's mother kept him away from religiosity, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And again, the Sadducees did not believe in an afterlife. They believed that if you, wasn't necessarily believing in the law like the Pharisees did, but they believed if you lived a good life, that you would be blessed. So they were all wealthy. They all had the chariots and the nicest horses and the nicest houses or tents or whatever. And then they believed that people didn't. If people were suffering and having a hard time, that's because they didn't fully believe, and so that was their hell. But they believed when you died, you just didn't exist anymore. The Pharisees believed in the law, the Mosaic law that Moses came up with, and they believed that you had to obey the law to be saved, you had to sacrifice to please God. They believed all that stuff. But again, the Essenes, they were mystics. I'm a mystic. I have no problem saying I'm a mystic. Mystic just means a person that's seeking spiritual truth. I am tired of the carnal teaching that I had all my life. It brought me nothing. It brought me no help. All I had was the fact that I was saved because I said the sinner's, well, I never said the sinner's prayer. I never did. I just grew up in church. But I just had this faith that I was saved and I was going to heaven someday. But I also worried that because maybe I committed some kind of symptom of a mistaken identity we called sins, that if I didn't ask God to forgive me and I died, I would go to hell. Because that was drilled into my head all my life. All right? So the Pharisees believed that kind of stuff. The Essenes believed that old outlook and perception was more of a spiritual thing. And that's why today we believe that most of the Bible is talking about an awareness, not about who you are. What I need saved is my awareness. Jesus came to save that which was lost, and what was lost is man's awareness of who they are. And if your daughter goes out or your grandson goes out and runs away, and you find them on the street, and they think they're poor, they think they don't have anything, and they're going to have to make it on their own, they've lost their awareness. I mean, because I know you take care of that boy. You don't spoil him. You do spoil him, but I mean, you're teaching him and trying to teach him to do well in life, but you provide for him. But something happened that caused him to not believe that, and so he had a mistaken identity. So you go to save that which was lost, which is awareness of who you really are and who he is. And that's what Jesus came to save. It never said he came to save the lost, because people say that all the time. I hear it all the time. Well, after all, Jesus came to save the lost. No, it said he came to save that which was lost. Or that which was lost. So, when we begin to study the Word, and we read and we study and we search for spiritual things, it brings us to this higher awareness, so we can live and move and have our being out of the cool of the day, which means spirit, right? And live in that awareness, because we already are in spirit. We are already with God. We already walk with God. We just haven't been aware of that because we felt like we were too unholy to even come into the presence of God. We were taught that. You remember at Tree of Life Fellowship years ago, when we had about 50-something people out there, one time I asked everybody, if God was back there in that back room and I told you that he wanted to see you, would you run back there real quick? How many of you would? And nobody lifted their hands. You know, and then I said, yeah, you'd want to come down and pray and ask God to forgive you first. And then we all laughed. How silly would that be? But I want to get right with God before I see God. Well, God's in you. But yet we've been taught, you better get right with God. You know, you got to get saved before you die. Well, you're already one with God. I know. And I'm not mocking that, because I've been there too. But when Jesus was waxing strong in spirit, which was he attained by awakening, right? He wasn't strong in spirit when he came out of his mama's womb. He was spirit, but he wasn't strong in spirit, right? He had to learn. And that's why God always sends comforter messengers to teach us. The man could have learned from the beginning if they would have listened to God. They didn't obey, which means to listen with intelligence and be able to repeat what was said. They didn't listen. And so when they went to church and they listened to teachers of the knowledge of good and evil, and they began to think, well, that's right, I made a mistake, or I did this, oh yes, amen, I'm a sinner. Then next thing you know, God says, where are you? You're not listening to me. You're not conversing with me. I mean, how many times have I said, when you've really messed up today, you're not interested in going to a prayer meeting tomorrow. You're not interested in listening to praise and worship music tomorrow because you feel guilty. And so God would say, where are you? Well, I messed up yesterday, and so I can't. I've lost my... Who told you that? That's what happened to man. So, you know, when this awareness comes in, we can live and move and have our being out of who we are. Who are we? We are Son of God. Everyone could have had that, but they lost their way. Jesus came to show them the way. He was the living way. He wasn't the way in the sense that you've got to get saved. He wasn't the way to be one with God. He was the way to show you how you are one with God already. So when he said, I am the way, I am the truth, and the life, he's saying, I'm here to show you that. I'm your waymark. I'm your banner. There's a sign out front here that says Stone Metal South. That's the way to get in here. If you're looking for Stone Metal South Edition, then go down Western to 159th and Western. You'll see a sign, and that's a waymark. That's a banner that says all this inside here is Stone Metal South. And that's what Jesus was. So when Paul, the apostle, in the beginning of his ministry, he was still having this dependency on the law. He knew the law backwards and forwards. And so he went to Mars Hill, and he was wanting to bring them to the knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. They were very intellectual people. And he was explaining to certain philosophers, the Epicureans and the Stoics and those at Athens, and they had these statues built out of stone that to all these different kinds of gods. I guess Zeus, the list could go on and on, but then they had one to the unknown God, just in case they missed out on one. And so he came to them and he began to declare to them and explain to them who this unknown God is. And he said, I declare unto you God, and they thought he was an idiot. I mean, you can read in the Bible, you know, we can listen to this, I'm babbling person or whatever, but they did, because he began to say some things that kind of got tickled their wanting to hear. So he said, I declare unto you, God that made the world and all things therein, that this one is the Lord. It said he, but when you look up he, it said this one. So I'm going to be saying this one, and you'll know what I'm saying. This one, not that God, not those gods, not Moses' God, right? Not the Baptist God, the Pentecostal the God, the list can go on and on and on. I don't have time to name all of them. Not that God, this one, the one and only God, is the Lord of heaven and earth, dwells not in temples made with hands, as though this one needed anything. Seeing this one giveth to all life and breath and all things. And he has made one blood all nations of men. Oh, if this world could just hear this. One blood. All nations, all minds of men, if you would, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. I like that when I looked at bounds of their habitation, because guess where we're supposed to habitate? Right here on planet Earth. We're not supposed to habitate in some planet called heaven, 25 billion miles. If that's what God wanted, that's where we would have been created. We would have stayed there. God in his mind imaged this out for us, and it's just beautiful. If you think there's anything better than planet Earth, you're sadly mistaken. It's beautiful.
What verse are you reading?
I didn't put that down, baby. It's in Acts. I'll get it for you, though. Okay, and then it says, bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the supreme divinity, if happily they might feel this one. Feel this one. Remember, you know, I've talked about this many times, but people say, well, how do you know God's real? I feel God. I feel the vibration of God. I feel the energy of God. That doesn't come from anything from without. And he said, and find this one. People need to find this one. Where is this one? This one is in you.
Yes.
This one is in every living thing. Though this one be not far from every one of us. Where's God? He's not far from you. He's in you. This one is in you. For in a relation of rest with this one we live, move, and have our being. As certain also your poets have said, for we are also this one's offspring. We are born of God. We live eternally on this planet. Not on a planet somewhere way off. This planet will always be inhabited by man. Right? Always. And I believe there will be a day that an awakening takes place, so much so that all of our loved ones that have lost their body, or their body ceased to be beholden, we will see they're all around us. They're all here us right now. It's hard to understand. I was telling Sandy that the other day. It's just, it doesn't help you when somebody just died for me to say, well, they're still here with you. But when you come to that awareness, you will know it. And you will sense them. If you feel God, you feel them. So, for as much as we're the offspring of this one, he said, we ought not to think that this one God is like gold, like silver, like stone, like graven by, or anything graven by art, are man's devices. So all these statues that have been made of gods, all these false gods, and all these statues that's been made of Jesus, which are not real. No one knows what Jesus looked like. No one alive today can tell you what Jesus looked like. And I don't see any place in the Bible where it really talks about that, except for where, he wasn't something to be desired. And, he was just a man. He wasn't somebody walking around with this holy glow over his head like they paint pictures of him. And this image that we have, it's a false image. And so literally I can say to you, if you have that image in your house and you're worshiping, you're praying to the image, you are worshiping a false idol. Even to the point that the crosses that we have, that is not what we're to be worshiping. We don't need to bow down to the cross. We don't need to bow down to Jesus on the cross. It's a horrible image, and God didn't do that. Man did that. That would be like bowing down to an image of your child that got killed. Why would you do that? That doesn't do anything for you. So literally, Paul was telling people, this is not God, and this is not what God wanted for you. Our Father never wanted statues made for mankind to bow down to, nor did Jesus. Now, I've said this before, Jesus didn't come so we would make an idol out of him. He came for us to follow his ideal. And his ideal was what he learned of God and what he knew of God. But yet people still do that today. I guarantee you there are people today that are bowing down to the cross. They're bowing down to the statue of Jesus, and they're asking Jesus to do something. And they're bowing down to all kinds of gods. Buddha, I guess Buddha was real, but he never wanted them to make a big old, especially why did you make me so fat? That's what I would say. But there are people bowing down to Buddhas and everything else, and Hindu gods, and the list goes on and on and on. What Father and Jesus desired is that we lay down all carnal beliefs, all carnal ambitions, so that we can grow into full realization of our oneness with Father. That's what he wanted. In Luke 1:90 and 2:40 that I mentioned earlier, the phrase wax strong is the Greek number 2901, and it's kratio. It's K-R-A-T-A-I-O-O, and it means to empower, to increase in vigor, to be powerful, commanding, and authoritative. That's what Jesus did when it says he waxed strong in spirit. In spirit, as he grew and he learned and he understood and he listened to the teachers and he drew from his supernatural mind, from the God mind, it empowered him, it increased him in his vigor, it made him more powerful in what he said and what he did, because words are powerful. He was commanding, the people listened to him, right? And he was authoritative to the point that the Jews hated him because they knew he was teaching the truth. Just like some of the leaders we have today, particularly one of them, he's very authoritative in what he's saying, and the religious political, because it is a religion in my opinion, they can't stand that. And so to me, that is proof that Jesus grew into all this. He just wasn't born with it. But he was born with the ability. He was born with the mind of God, but he needed teachers to help him. And we all need teachers. Everything I know was not just dropped into me some night when I was asleep. It wasn't. I didn't get taken to some place and left alone for 3 or 4 days, and God just dropped everything into me, and all of a sudden I know everything there is to know. No, it came to a process of time of messenger comforters coming into my life. Some of them didn't know they were. Some of them were not masters yet. I'm not a master comforter teacher, but I am a comforter teacher. But I'm coming a long way. And I pray that I come to that place where I can live totally out who I am, so I can bless other people more and more and more. And so Jesus grew in understanding and wisdom at the age of 12. At that time, he was becoming the master comforter teacher, but he still needed to decide who he was and agree with it. So when he said, I am who God says I am, and I'm not here to take over, I'm to go to the cross and suffer the judgment of the Jews, at that point in time, it said he entered back into spirit, because he did that as, more on a lower realm awareness, but he entered back into a supernatural being, and it said the fame of him was heard all throughout the earth. He did all kinds of marvelous supernatural work. He walked on water. He spoke to the storms and said, "You're perfect, so just be perfect." There's all kinds of things that he did, and it was supernatural. And boy, they didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. Tradition says that from birth to 30, he was just obedient to his mom and daddy and just stayed home with his mom and daddy. That's not true. He was taught and he learned and he grew. So, as Jesus grew in understanding of wisdom and knowledge, then he started his ministry. And I think we could say with authority, no people who follow carnal religion rules have waxed strong in spirit. No one has. Now, we think because people can give words of knowledge and can prophesy like people call prophesy, we think because they may be able to interpret dreams and they pray a long time, we have titled them really spiritual people, but that's not spiritual. Brother Garner said this, what makes you spiritual is how much you know about God and your union with God. That's what makes you spiritual. That's what makes you can live out of your spirit. So, when this one God, Father, created mankind, this one God breathed into their nostrils the breath of life. And man became what? A living, holy breath, or a soul, a living soul. Some people say that we are life-giving spirits, which we are. We are to give life to people in everything that we say. And so the word soul is napash, or the word spirit is napash. And so we could use that. We can say spirit, we can say holy breath, we can say soul, whatever you want. It's all the same thing. But we're not just flesh and blood and bone. We're not. We're much more than that. We are the very breath of God. We are supernatural beings today. The sooner we can realize that, the sooner we can help our world. I can't go you into all the world, but I can help my world. But if I needed to, and I was aware of who I was, I could transport to another place. You know, I've said this before, and I don't say it braggingly, and I was shocked, but I got a letter several years ago thanking me for going to Africa and preaching, and physically that I know of, I've never been to Africa. But it was a very detailed letter of everything I did, and I even gave a pair of shoes to somebody. So you don't know where you're at when you're sleeping. You know, or maybe I wasn't sleeping. Maybe it happened and there's no time with God. So I don't know. But I'm just saying we are powerful. We are all powerful. And we can do all things, right?
Yes.
Not through Jesus that strengthens us. We can do all things through holy breath, through spirit. That's what Christ really means. Through the spirit that's within us that strengthens us. And that's our strength. Yes. And so Jesus learned how to live out of that. Yes. He was empowered. He grew. And so how many of us really could say that we have sat under real spiritual teachers that taught us truth most of our life? We did not. And that's why we're struggling today, because we haven't been taught the truth. We've been children of the great lie. So this will open up, this been tutored and been taught and been trained of spirit, and finding a comforter messenger that will teach you truth and sticking with them instead of just chasing from one to another to another. That's what a lot of people do. They get tired of one and they get tired of listening to this and they go find something else, because very few people literally, and have people tell me this all the time, I just don't have time to watch your whole video. I don't have time to read a book. Well, if not now, when? You do have time. That's the lie. You think you don't have time. Literally, when you begin to seek spiritual things, guess what happens? Your time enlarges, because time has no more power over you, right? So literally, you're giving your time a power in your life. And you'll never grow and you'll never understand. A lot of people say, I've never read a book in my life. And I just say, that's sad. And I understand, because I used to not be a reader, but I became one. And I study all the time now. I don't read books just to read books, I study. And I look for what I want to learn and what I want to hear, Father. So even the Apostle Paul was taught in the desert. Did you know that? He went to the Arabian desert. Jesus probably went to the Arabian desert too. He said he went to the deserts. And I believe the Apostle Paul was also taught of the scenes. And I believe the Apostle Paul was taught of Jesus. Jesus appeared to him. And he said, you're fighting me. You're resisting when I came here to teach. Why are you fighting when I came to teach? And I have to say, sometimes I wish people around could hear us transport to them and say, why are you fighting us? We're coming here with the truth. Why are you fighting us? And why are you saying you don't need to listen to Roy and you don't need to listen to this person and you need to stay away from these people and they're going to cause problems? Why are you doing that? Because they want to keep control, right? That's why the Jews fought him. They didn't want to let go of the control of the Father. Of the people. So how do we think he was able to raise himself from death? Just like Jesus did. Jesus raised himself, resurrected himself. And when Paul was stoned to death, he resurrected himself and came back because he knew he had much more to teach. So I will probably close right here because I have much more and I'll do that next week. So Paul said, in closing, Paul said to the community of believers at Galatia, he said, I certify to you, this message I preach and teach and explain is not from any carnally mindful man. Now, what most people say he said is, and in the King James it said this, I learned this from no man, except from Jesus. But that's not what it said. He didn't learn from any carnally mindful man. So I do believe he learned from the scenes too. And because most people today will say, well, what I know, I didn't learn from anyone. Well, sometimes I question that. Sometimes I think there's a little pride there when you say that. I hear things from Father. I do. You can hear things from Father, but it's going to be confirmed in what's been taught before. And almost everything I've heard Father say to me, I go in and I start studying and I discover it in one place or another, where another messenger before heard this too. There's nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
You didn't come up with something that never was before. Just like scientists, like I said last week, electricity was already here. They just discovered it.
Right.
And so what I want to say is, Father, help me discover a truth.
Yes.
God always, when you tapped into this God, into the God mind, then the God mind helps you discover what's already true. And just like Kay said, we don't create anything that God didn't already create. So he said, I was taught it by revelation knowledge from Jesus teaching me. And it's interesting, when Paul came back, he did not consult the apostles at all. He didn't run to them and say, guess what Jesus told me? He didn't do that. What he learned in Arabia, he was very quiet with it for a while. He only talked to Peter very shortly, and then he talked to James because James was the presiding elder over the Jerusalem church. But he didn't want what he was taught to be infected by religiosity. Because if you come back and you start telling carnally-minded people what the Lord showed you, where they're going to say, has God not said? Did God really say that? And I've had people tell me that. So when I discover a truth, I have two people that I trust very greatly that are spiritually mindful, and that's Kay Fairchild and Butch Hodge. I'm not saying nobody else is. And I've called other people and shared things with them. But those are the two sources that I go to because I trust them. I trust their listen. Some historical writers say that Paul learned went out in the desert and he learned by reading the Torah. Well, that's not true. He already knew the Torah. He knew it backwards and forwards. He learned from Jesus. He learned from the Essenes. They taught him the spiritual aspect. Jesus taught him what Jesus tried to teach, but the disciples couldn't bear it because they were all so bankrupt physically that they just wanted bread and they wanted money and they wanted the power. They wanted to sit on his right hand. They wanted an earthly kingdom at that time. But he came to prepare the way. John the Baptist prepared the way for him. He came to prepare the way for other comforter, messer teachers. Because he said, I'm not going to leave you comfortless. And religion said that was the Holy Spirit. But it is. It's the Holy Spirit in man. I'm going to send you many, many more. The word another means many. People ask me about this lately. The word another means many, many. In other words, there's no number to them. And the comforter means a comforter, teacher, and explainer of truth. That was Paul. That was John. That was the Essenes. That was many other people. And there's many in the earth today that are teachers of truth, and we need to tap into that. So I hope this blessed you. I thoroughly enjoyed studying it. I got a lot more to go, so we appreciate you being here. We appreciate all you guys with us today. There's Linda and Brandy. Good to see you guys. We love you very much. Hope you have a good day. And I will post this on YouTube if you follow this on YouTube, and that song will be on there if you want to hear it. It's called God is a Fire, and the chorus in it is burn, fire, burn. Everything away that's not of God. So I think you enjoy that. Bless you. Thank you.